What's a way to assure greatness or success with a show or movie? Pretty colorful cast, pandering to your demographic, perhaps maybe a high budget? I don't know. It was an open-ended question with an open-ended variety of plausible answers. The film we're analyzing today is the 1985 Angel's Egg. Fantastic in its own right, but with having no immediate or apparent admirable characteristics from the get-go. By this I mean it has an incredibly limited amount of spoken dialogue, hardly any action or explanation of what's happening. Yet, while being so unbelievably esoteric, it manages to be brilliant. And I want to discuss why. When I first finished Angel's Egg, I got this feeling of connection, a strange feeling of resonation. I wanted to not only analyze this film to unravel the obscure story, but also to find out what made it so impactful. And for me, it had all to do with the atmosphere, the aesthetic. Angel's Egg is a beauty of minimalism, haunting background artwork, and the eerie soundtrack. It makes for a very distinctive atmosphere. And I'd like to put the film's premise aside for a moment and just talk about atmosphere in general, just to shed some light on the conflicting emotions people may have after watching this movie. When I think of something memorable, for instance, it's normally the imagery or the mindscape that comes into fruition, like how you may not remember specifically what was going on during a particular scene in a movie or what people were saying, but the imagery of the scene. The atmosphere is what sticks around long after you finish the movie. Not with just film either, but with any kind of consumption of art. Exact lines spoken during a movie or whilst listening to a song may be unmemorable, but if it had a distinctive ambience, you can oddly recall what you felt during that time. The impact is subconsciously stored in your memory. It's like the way expressing normally insecure feelings in form of film or music can be conceived as relatable, and not something that's petty if done right. Done right being the message, expertly woven in commonalities shared with its viewer or listener, but is obscured in directorial or lyrical expertise or brilliance to mask the significance to those who understand it the most. Memorability and impact have everything to do with atmosphere. Everything to do with aesthetics.
The meticulous shot composition, the consequential pacing, and all the subtle details. I want to be art.
To kill myself. And how I mentioned it takes a certain level of expertise to properly pull off ambience or atmosphere. I don't know if I have the same level of proficiency or properly convey my feelings about this subject in a compelling enough way for people to understand my appreciation for this form of expression that filmmakers and artists put into their work. It's somewhat ambiguous to define atmosphere. That speaks to me. So when it comes down to it, that's the reason people, including myself, praise Angel's Egg. These feelings of connection or relativeness that the tone presents only really comes across well if you're in the proper mindset. This subdued, hopeless mindset in the case of Angel's Egg. In any case, memorability with atmosphere effectively has a strong connotation with nostalgia. And nostalgia can be a bittersweet and poetic demeanor of life that often works as a bias. And I admit to it myself, favoring shows and overlooking their flaws just because of the atmosphere. It was captivating, it was memorable to me, and it felt as though a visual imprint was left in my mind, glorifying the work years after I'd seen it. The divide is what makes for good atmosphere and what makes for tedious, repetitive bloat. Take Serial Experiments Lane, for example, with the constant imagery of the overhead power lines buzzing away. They were reoccurring. They do have a meaning that suits the show, and in my opinion does define the atmosphere. Yet others who I've spoken with find it boring or even annoying, and a selfish part of me doesn't want to accept the truth sometimes. You can agree or disagree to whichever side. It's irrelevant in any case. There is no wrong in terms of enjoyability, and you can't watch something wrong. This is a more glamorized way of saying either you loved it or hated it. When it comes to a certain more artistic movies, and Angel's Egg is no exception. It may not be appealing at the start, but every subsequent viewing could lead to a gradual appreciation. Not easy to pull off in film, but masterful when it's done properly. Love it or hate it may be a sort of a shallow or superficial way of viewing it. It's more so Angel's Egg is a story where you determine your own conclusion, and this concept or conclusion is one that is either loved or hated. Much like talking about any kind of art, this entire prologue, if you will, was just a preliminary input as to not sound pretentious while talking about this movie, because Angel's Egg has so few dialogue. Most of its meaning comes from imagery or symbolism, and even analogies to biblical lore. And I guess, in a way, having something so artistic explained verbally seems counterproductive with Angel's Egg. It's your interpretation that matters most in the end, but saying this seems like a cop-out or an excuse to always be right. There are still a lot of questions to ask about this movie, so let's discuss and understand this movie and reach a pseudo-definitive conclusion together. The director of Angel's Egg is Mamoru Oshii, who himself had a rise and fall with religion, specifically Christianity. He even trained in his youth in seminary for priesthood and found himself asking questions that would later follow to be the premise or the basis of Angel's Egg's overall narrative. The girl in Angel's Egg is normally taken as a follower of religion, and the egg being the embodiment of her faith. The angel and her egg. The egg can be viewed as spiritual seed planted in a human soul by the gospel of Christ. At one point in the movie, we see these organic tree-like structures protruding from the ground, holding eggs with what resembles birds inside. Presumably, in the context of the narrative, they are awaiting their realization of their true form, or their true form can be represented as an angelic one, as birds can be symbolized as angels. The great tree can be described as the tree of life, rooted from the ground, sprouting life. Each of the giant eggs apparently resembling the human soul and its spiritual incompletion. The man in Angel's Egg is portrayed as a Christ-like figure, wielding a giant cross-like object with bandages on his hand, strongly reminiscent of Christian mythos. The question of his intent is doubtful, however. Whether he is good or bad can be debated. Much like religion overall, the interpretation of him being both bad and good have pretty strong cases on both ends. The movie makes him out to be a relatively negative individual with devious intents, where he gains the girl's trust, leads her on, only to later destroy the only thing she cherished and loved in the menacing world, the egg. This very well could also be a visual representation of the director Mamoru's fallout with Christianity. The somber and dreadful imagery more than justify a false sense of reassurance the girl had while caring for her egg. It was characterized as something that was beloved to her, her soul, her faith. Her devotion to it was the only literal thing keeping her going. The man explains his motives for breaking the egg, which by contrast is a positive perspective on the outcomes that followed. He explains that without opening it, one may never realize the true potential of what's inside. He overcame her selfish tendencies of treasuring the egg. It was consuming her every action and took priority over all else thoughtlessly. Her only outlet of motivation, her only solace in this miserable world, leaving her to realize her own self with the actions of destroying the egg. If she had kept blindly following her beliefs and nothing more, it would lead to only more pain. How the devotion led by a false path or blind faith results in nothing more than death and sadness. This can be brilliantly shown in with the fossilized remains of the various birds curled up in a position similar to being within an egg, dying without realizing their true potential. This is why the man destroyed the egg, and is a stunning way of showing Mamoru's realization that blind faith, in his perspective, can be compared to an illusion of happiness, without truly knowing actuality. It's brilliant, but also an eerie, saddening discovery, a painting metaphor of life. Without something to cherish, to have faith in, will we stay blissfully ignorant or one day find our eggs broken and questioning our purpose? Other notable imagery can be collected and analyzed with the same message put into perspective. The entire world they live in is full of this confusion, this pursuit of something that's impossible. They shadow silhouette figures chasing and hunting down fish, shadows resembling only the remains of the people and their beliefs. An imaginary hunt for something that's not really there, chasing blindly, trying to catch something that's imperceptible, all while simultaneously destroying all that's tangible. The story behind the Ark, despite its historical significance, is taken as a narrative allegory. Momuru presumably borrowed the idea from the Epistle of Peter, alluding to the moment of salvation where the Ark represents the preservation of the human spirit. With that one last final scene at the end, the camera pans out to reveal the Ark on a grander scale. This can be equated to the entirety of the remnants of human souls preserved through the last judgment by devoting itself to faith.
She get out some